Okay, so here's the thing. My name's Liam, or at least it was. I was just trying to get groceries, you know. Normal Tuesday, heading into the Super Save on Elm Street. Then it all went to hell. 1 minute, people are grabbing the last loaf of bread, the next, there's screaming. Not like, oh, I dropped my ice cream, screaming. More like, oh, my insides are being eaten by my neighbor, screaming. I peeked out from behind the cereal aisle, and that's when I saw it. Mrs. Gable, who always gave me cookies when I was a kid, was, well, she was on Mr. Henderson. And Mr. Henderson was not having a good time. His face was all mangled, and she was just tearing at him. It was primal. The way her jaw moved, unnaturally fast, and the sounds she was making. Then she looked up, and her eyes, they weren't Mrs. Gable's eyes anymore. They were milky, vacant, and fixed on something I couldn't see. And that sound, that horrible guttural noise, it was infectious. People started falling, getting bitten, and then, they'd get up. But they weren't people anymore. They were just these shuffling, shambling things, driven by this insatiable hunger. The Super Save, my sanctuary of snacks and sanity, turned into a charnel house. The smell hit me next, a coppery, metallic tang mixed with something rotten and sweet. I hid, frozen, watching this horrifying ballet of destruction. The instinct to survive kicked in hard. No more groceries. Just, get out. But how? The doors were mobbed. People clawing at each other, not just at the infected, but at each other. Desperation was a physical thing, a thick, suffocating blanket. I managed to slip out the back, through the loading dock. The world outside was just as bad, if not worse. Cars were crashed, people were running, and everywhere, those things. They were everywhere. I saw a woman, her arm torn open, still trying to shield her child. It was sickening. The sheer speed of the collapse was mind-boggling. One moment it's order, the next it's pure, unadulterated chaos. You start to question everything. Is anyone safe? Can you even trust a scream anymore? I spent that first night huddled in an alleyway, the sounds of the city's death rattle echoing around me. Hunger started to gnaw, a dull ache that promised to become a constant companion. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every rustle of leaves made me jump. I found a discarded water bottle, half full, and drank it like it was the finest champagne. You learn to appreciate the little things, you know. Like not being eaten alive. It's a low bar, but in this new world, it's everything. What would you do? If you saw that happen, what would be your first move? Would you try to find family, or just run as far as your legs could carry you? I'm recording this, I guess, as a kind of final message. I don't know. If anyone ever finds this, please, hit that subscribe button. Give this a like. Maybe, just maybe, someone out there can learn from my mistakes, or even, help. I'm just trying to make it to tomorrow. The gnawing hunger was becoming a constant companion. It wasn't just a pang anymore, it was a dull ache that made every movement feel like a chore. I'd managed to scrounge up a few berries yesterday, but they were long gone, and the fear of what might happen if I didn't find something more substantial was starting to set in. The initial panic of the collapse had subsided, replaced by a grim determination to simply survive. I decided to try a different direction. The way I'd come from seemed too exposed, too many open spaces where anything could be lurking. This new path led into a denser patch of woods, the trees taller and closer together. It felt a little safer, a bit more enclosed, but it also meant less visibility. Every rustle of leaves, every snapping twig, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. My senses were on high alert, constantly scanning for threats. I stumbled upon a small stream, the water clear and cold. I'd been rationing the little I had left in my canteen, so this was a welcome sight. I knelt down, cupping my hands and drinking deeply. It was the best water I'd tasted in days, a small victory in the grand scheme of things. While I was there, I noticed some faint tracks on the muddy bank. They looked recent. And they weren't animal tracks. My heart started to pound. Were there other people? Was this a good thing or a bad thing? I followed the tracks for a bit, moving cautiously. They led further into the woods, disappearing and reappearing as the ground changed. Then I heard it, a faint metallic clinking sound. It was close. Too close. I froze, trying to pinpoint the direction. It sounded like someone was scavenging, maybe trying to make a fire or break something open. I could see a flicker of movement between the trees up ahead. I debated whether to call out, to reveal myself. But the fear of the unknown, of who or what might be making that sound, held me back. I decided to observe first, to get a better understanding of the situation. Peeking through the undergrowth, I saw a figure crouched near a fallen log. They were wearing tattered clothes, similar to my own. They seemed to be trying to pry open a damaged metal box. My initial relief at seeing another person was quickly tempered by caution. I'd seen enough to know that desperation could make people do terrible things. I stayed hidden, watching their every move. They finally managed to wrench the box open, and I saw them pull out something small and shiny. They then quickly scanned their surroundings before disappearing deeper into the woods, leaving the empty box behind. I waited a few more minutes, making sure they were gone, before approaching the abandoned box. It was empty, but the tracks on the ground confirmed my suspicions. I wasn't alone in this new world. And the question of whether that was a good or bad thing remained unanswered. The city was a symphony of screams and the guttural moans that had become far too common. I was on the rooftop of what used to be a bookstore, looking out over downtown. The initial chaos, the panicked rush, it was all a blur now, replaced by this constant, gnawing fear. I saw a mother, her eyes wide with terror, trying to pull her child away from a shambling figure. The figure, it wasn't human anymore. Its jaw hung open, a gruesome, bloody mess, and its eyes were milky, devoid of anything recognizable. It lunged, and the mother's scream was cut short by a sickening crunch. That sound. It's etched into my brain. My mind was a battlefield. One moment, I was clinging to the hope that this was a nightmare, that I'd wake up to a world where the biggest problem was finding clean water. The next, I was drowning in the sheer, unadulterated horror of it all. I saw people I knew, neighbors, friends, contorted and driven by an insatiable hunger. Their skin was pallid, their movements jerky and unnatural. They didn't just bite, they tore, ripped, and consumed with a savage ferocity that chilled me to the bone. The sheer desperation on the faces of the few still trying to fight back, before being overwhelmed, it was a sight that haunts my sleep. I'd managed to scavenge a few cans of peaches and a half-empty bottle of water from the bookstore before the last of the sensible people fled, or became them. Every creak of the floorboards, every distant groan, sent a jolt of adrenaline through me. I couldn't trust anyone. The initial days had taught me that lesson brutally. People would offer help, a shared meal, a safe haven, only to turn on you when they saw something you had that they wanted, or worse, when the infection, that insidious plague, started to show its first signs. I saw a group, huddled around a meager fire, sharing stories, and then, one of them started to cough, a deep, wet sound that made everyone freeze. The fear that flashed across their faces, the dawning realization, it was a terrifying spectacle of betrayal and inevitable doom. The quiet moments were the worst. That's when the loneliness truly sank in, a heavy, suffocating blanket. The silence was deafening, broken only by the echoes of what once was. I'd find myself talking to myself, just to hear a human voice, even if it was my own, cracked and hoarse. The thought of what I'd have to do to survive, to keep moving, it was a heavy burden. Could I become that monstrous? Could I cross that line? The question hung in the air, a constant companion to the gnawing hunger in my own stomach and the ever-present dread of what tomorrow would bring. I had to move. Staying here, in this tomb of a city, was no longer an option. The peaches were almost gone, and the water wouldn't last much longer. The open road, or what was left of it, beckoned, a terrifying unknown. The chill wind whipped through the skeletal remains of buildings, a constant reminder of how quickly everything had changed. I pulled the tattered scarf tighter around my neck, the thin fabric doing little to ward off the biting cold. My boots crunched on unseen debris as I moved, a ghost in a city of ghosts. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every distant sound made my heart pound a frantic rhythm against my ribs. I wasn't just afraid of the living anymore. The hunger was a dull ache that never truly left, a constant pressure behind my eyes. It was the kind of hunger that made you think about things you never wanted to consider, about what you'd do to survive. I reached the edge of the city, the rubble-strewn street giving way to a cracked and overgrown highway. The signposts were rusted husks, their words long faded, offering no guidance. This was it, the road ahead. It looked empty, endless, and terrifying. I took a deep breath, tasting dust and decay. My pack felt lighter than I wanted it to, a testament to how little I'd managed to scavenge. The remaining peaches were down to 2, bruised and soft, but precious. As I started walking, the silence of the open road was a different kind of oppressive than the city's hushed decay. It was a vast, indifferent emptiness. The sun, a pale disk behind a perpetual haze, offered little warmth. I kept my head down, scanning the horizon for any movement, any sign of danger. The fear was a constant hum beneath the surface, but the instinct to keep moving, to find something, anything, was stronger. I thought of the stories, the whispers I'd heard before everything fell apart, of places untouched by the sickness, places where life still went on. Those stories felt like fairy tales now, but I clung to them. Hours passed. The landscape was a monotonous stretch of broken asphalt and skeletal trees. My throat was dry, and the hunger was starting to sharpen its claws again. I spotted something ahead, a dark shape against the muted landscape. A vehicle, overturned and mangled, partially hidden in a ditch. Hope, a dangerous commodity, flickered. I approached cautiously, my hand instinctively reaching for the makeshift club I carried. It was an old pickup truck, its metal skin peeled back like fruit, revealing the rusted guts within. No one. Just the silence and the wreckage. Disappointment washed over me, cold and sharp. I rummaged through the cab anyway, a desperate, futile search. A few scraps of paper, a cracked mirror, nothing useful. The glove compartment was empty. I kicked the tire, the dull thud echoing in the stillness. Then, my eye caught something under the driver's seat, wedged deep in the shadows. It was a small, metal container, the kind you might keep things in. My heart gave a little jump. I reached for it, my fingers brushing against grit and something sharp. I pulled the container out. It was heavier than I expected, and cold to the touch. There was no lock, just a tight seal that required a good deal of wiggling to break. Inside, nestled on a bed of what looked like dried leaves, were several small, dark seeds. They weren't like any seeds I'd ever seen. They were smooth, almost polished, and had a faint, earthy scent. Disappointment pricked at me. I'd been hoping for something, anything, that might explain what happened, or at least give me a clue. These just looked like seeds. I pocketed the container, the seeds clinking faintly against the metal. The sun was starting to dip below the horizon, casting long, eerie shadows across the deserted road. I knew I couldn't stay here. With a sigh, I turned my back on the silent taxi and started walking. The air was growing cooler, and a light breeze rustled through the sparse trees lining the road. As I walked, I kept thinking about the seeds. Why would someone hide them like this? They didn't seem like anything valuable, at least not in the way people usually think of valuables. Then, a memory surfaced, faint at first, then sharper. Old stories, whispered around campfires when I was a kid, about special herbs, plants that could do things. Things that were forgotten now. I stopped, the seeds feeling warm in my pocket. Could it be? It was a long shot, a ridiculous idea, but what else did I have? I looked up at the darkening sky. The stars were beginning to appear, tiny pinpricks of light in the vast expanse. The next morning, I found myself at the edge of a small, neglected patch of land on the outskirts of town. It was overgrown with weeds, but in the center, a few stubborn, wild flowers managed to bloom. This was the place. I took out the metal container and carefully poured the seeds into my palm. They felt strangely alive, buzzing with a latent energy. Following an instinct I couldn't explain, I dug small holes in the earth with my fingers, placing each seed with care. I covered them up, patting the soil gently. I didn't have any water, so I just hoped for rain. As I stood up, a feeling of quiet resolve settled over me. I didn't know if anything would come of this, if these seeds held any power, but it was a chance. A chance to try, to do something, to see if something forgotten could bloom again. The road ahead was still uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, I felt a flicker of hope, fragile as a new sprout. The asphalt shimmered with heat, not a cloud in the sky. Elias hunched against the crumbling brick wall of what used to be a diner, the stench of decay thick in the air. He'd been holed up in a small town that now looked like a war zone after a bad acid trip. It started subtly, whispers of a strange flu, then the panic. He saw it unfold firsthand, not in some distant news report, but right here, on this godforsaken main street. A woman, a regular at the diner, a sweet older lady who always tipped well, lunged at the sheriff, her eyes milky white, her jaw hanging slack. The sheriff, bless his soul, tried to reason with her, then he was just another one of them, a shambling, groaning mess tearing into anyone unlucky enough to be in range. Elias had seen a man, a burly construction worker, gnawing on something that looked suspiciously like a human arm, his face smeared with blood. It wasn't just the gore, though that was bad enough, it was the utter loss of humanity, the grotesque contortions of what were once familiar faces. It was the sound, too, a constant, low, guttural moaning that seemed to seep into your bones. It made his own stomach churn, his thoughts scatter like pigeons. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat, every rustle of leaves made his heart leap into his throat. He'd managed to scavenge some canned beans and a lukewarm bottle of water from the diner's kitchen, but the thought of venturing out again, of facing that tide of mindless hunger, made his hands shake. Trust was a forgotten luxury. He'd seen people turn on each other for a can of peaches, heard the screams of betrayal echoing through the silent streets. The isolation was a gnawing ache, a constant companion. He talked to himself, sometimes just to hear a human voice, even if it was his own, hoarse and cracking. The fear was a physical thing, a cold knot in his gut that never quite loosened. He needed to move, to find a safer place, but where? Every direction seemed to lead to more of the same nightmare. He'd caught a glimpse of himself in the grimy diner window, gaunt, wild-eyed, a ghost in his own life. He knew, with a chilling certainty, that if he wasn't careful, he'd become one of them too, not through infection, but through sheer, soul-crushing despair. He cautiously peered around the corner. The sun was starting to dip, casting long, eerie shadows. A low moan, closer than he liked, echoed from down the street. It wasn't just one. It was a chorus of the damned. His hands tightened around the rusty pipe he'd found. He didn't know what the next hour held, let alone the next day, but standing still felt like surrender. He had to keep moving, had to find a way to outrun the gnawing emptiness inside and the gnawing hunger outside. He edged along the building, keeping his back pressed against the cold brick. The moans were definitely getting louder, a guttural symphony of shuffling feet and guttural cries. He could see them now, vague shapes lurching in the fading light, their movements jerky and unnatural. They weren't walking, not really. They were more like being dragged along by some invisible, malevolent force. He swallowed hard, the sound loud in his own ears. That pipe was heavy, but it felt flimsy against the sheer number of them. He had to cross the street. There was no other way to get to the covered market he'd spotted earlier, the one with the boarded-up windows that might, just might, offer some shelter for the night. The open space was a death trap, but the alleyways were just as bad, likely filled with more of them. He waited for a lull, a brief moment where the moans seemed to recede slightly, and then he bolted. The asphalt felt rough beneath his worn boots. He ran as fast as he could, his breath coming in ragged gasps. A few of the figures turned, their heads snapping in his direction with an audible crack. One started to shamble towards him, its arms outstretched, fingers curled like talons. He didn't dare look back, focusing on the dark maw of the market entrance. The distance felt impossibly vast. He reached the opposite sidewalk, slamming his shoulder against the rough wood of the boarded-up entrance. It groaned but held firm. He fumbled with the pipe, trying to pry at a loose board. The sounds behind him were getting closer, the shuffling feet now a distinct patter on the street. The air grew cold, a damp chill that had nothing to do with the setting sun. He could feel a presence right behind him, a foul odor filling his nostrils. With a sudden surge of adrenaline, he ripped a plank free. It splintered with a satisfying crack. He scrambled inside, pulling the jagged wood back into place as best he could. Darkness enveloped him, thick and suffocating, but it was a welcome relief. He could still hear them outside, bumping against the walls, their mournful cries echoing through the thin wood. He slumped against the inner wall, his heart hammering against his ribs. He was safe, for now. But the gnawing emptiness, both inside him and all around, remained. He needed to find something to eat, something to drink, and a place to rest without the constant threat of being torn apart. The darkness was absolute, and he could hear the scuttling of small creatures in the corners of the market. It wasn't the enemy he was worried about right now. He pushed himself away from the wall, the rough stone scraping against his already raw skin. The sounds of the market were muted here, a distant hum that offered little comfort. Hunger was a dull ache that was starting to sharpen into a more insistent demand. He needed to move, to scout, to find something before the weakness became overwhelming. The darkness was a cloak, but it also hid threats. He couldn't stay put. He ventured out of the alcove, his bare feet barely making a sound on the packed earth. The stalls were a jumbled mess of collapsed wood and overturned barrels, remnants of the chaos that had engulfed the place. He felt his way along, his hands brushing against splintered wood and what felt like dried cloth. His stomach rumbled again, a hollow, pathetic sound that seemed too loud in the oppressive quiet. He imagined the smell of roasted meat, the sweet tang of fruit, but the reality was the dust and decay. A flicker of movement caught his eye. Low to the ground, a shadow detached itself from the larger gloom. A rat, probably. He ignored it. His focus was on anything edible, anything that could sustain him for another day. He stumbled over something soft. It was a sack, ripped open, and a few dried beans spilled out onto the ground. He didn't hesitate. He knelt, scooping up the meager contents, ignoring the dirt that clung to them. They were hard, dry, and tasted like dust, but he chewed them slowly, trying to coax some nourishment from them. He continued his search, his movements more purposeful now. He found a cracked amphora, its contents long since evaporated, but the dampness inside offered a few precious drops of moisture. He licked the inside greedily. It wasn't much, but it was something. The emptiness wasn't as sharp, at least for now. He kept moving through the labyrinth of stalls, the darkness pressing in, the silence punctuated by his own breathing and the occasional skittering sound. He was a ghost in a dead city, and survival was a solitary, desperate act. He spotted a larger structure ahead, a more solid building, maybe a storage shed. It was worth investigating. He moved towards it, his hope a fragile ember in the pervasive gloom. Thank you for joining me on this journey through the hushed remnants of what once was. As you reflect on the tales of resilience and the ever-present shadow, remember that preparedness is not just a virtue, it's a lifeline. In any unforeseen circumstance, having a basic understanding of water purification, even something as simple as boiling water found in sealed containers, can make the difference between life and death. The glint of something metallic caught his eye near the doorway of the abandoned storage shed. It was a sturdy, unopened can of peaches, a small but significant treasure in this desolate landscape. He pried it open with his makeshift tool, the sweet scent a stark contrast to the decay surrounding him. Inside, the fruit was preserved perfectly, a burst of flavor that momentarily chased away the gnawing emptiness. This wasn't just sustenance, it was a reminder of a world that valued care and foresight, a world that could be rebuilt, perhaps, with the same principles. The shed itself offered more than just shelter. It contained a collection of old gardening tools and thick canvas tarps, items that would prove invaluable for creating a more secure and comfortable long-term camp. He carefully gathered what he could, his movements economical and deliberate. Remember the stories we've shared, the quiet strength found in unexpected places. When faced with overwhelming fear or despair, the most potent weapon is a calm mind. Panic clouds judgment, leading to rash decisions that can have dire consequences. Taking a moment to breathe, to assess your surroundings, and to think logically about your next step can transform a terrifying situation into a manageable challenge. It's about finding that small, inner stillness, that quiet resolve that allows you to move forward, one deliberate action at a time. This ability to remain composed under pressure is a fundamental aspect of not just surviving, but thriving. If these narratives have resonated with you, if they've sparked a sense of awareness and the importance of being ready for the unexpected, please consider subscribing and sharing your thoughts in the comments below. Your engagement helps to keep these stories alive and to foster a community of informed and prepared individuals. What would you have done with that can of peaches? What other simple preparations do you believe are most crucial? Let us know.